The Libby, Montana asbestos disaster has been described as the worst case of industrial poisoning in American history. In 1919, companies started mining vermiculite, a compound known for its structural integrity and heat-resistant properties in Montana. Vermiculite was used to produce a wide range of products, including concrete, shoes, and insulation. The town of Libby also used this compound for much of its infrastructure, such as parks, buildings, and roads. Unknown to the workers and citizens of Libby, the mines were heavily contaminated with asbestos, a compound formed under the same conditions that produced vermiculite. As the vermiculite was mined, it disturbed the minuscule, hook-like asbestos fibers, and clouds of harmful dust were casted over the town. The consequences of asbestos exposure were not immediately obvious to the general public. W.R. Grace and Company, the primary corporation responsible for mining in Libby, claimed that they were unaware of the hazards of asbestos exposure prior to purchasing the mining facilities. However, earlier studies revealed that 48 out of 130 mine workers from Libby had evidence of lung disease. When this dust was inhaled, the fibers became embedded in people's lung tissue. Over time, asbestos causes scarring of the lungs as cancerous mesothelioma slowly weakens the lung's ability to expand. A former nurse from Libby recalled, "It's the most gruesome death you can imagine. Eventually, they are gulping like fish out of water." The vast use of vermiculite within the town of Libby and long duration of its mining have accounted for at least 694 Libby residents losing their lives and 2,400 of its 3,000 residents being diagnosed with asbestos-related diseases. Over 1 million cubic feet of contaminated soil from over 2,600 properties has been removed. Although the mines were closed in 1990, it's predicted that the direct effects of asbestos will continue to be seen in the healthcare system until at least the 2030s due to mesothelioma's long latency period.
One of the main causes of this disaster was the lack of preventative policies and disaster protocols. The dangers and adverse effects of mining on human health, although not completely understood, were apparent before vermiculite mining in Libby even began. However, it was not until the late 20th century that mining regulations came into effect. For example, the Montana Mine Reclamation Act did not come into effect until 1989, which ensured that all persons and companies returned mined land back into a usable form following their operations. This ensured that safe exploration and mining activities were being used. During the legal proceedings for the Montana asbestos disaster, unfortunately the judge was unable to prosecute mining companies for violating safety laws as they were not active during the mine's operation. Therefore, the absence of prior federal and regional mining protocols and regulations allowed the asbestos-containing vermiculite to be extracted in the first place in Libby.
The main cause of this disaster includes the inadequate response after the effects became apparent. For decades, local residents raised their concerns about the devastating impact of asbestos in the community, but the Environmental Protection Agency did not respond to these cries until 1999. A decade later, in 2009, the EPA declared it a public health emergency, and the victims of the disaster were only then eligible to receive federal health care. Additionally, even after mining operations stopped and the Superfund program started, the cleanup took decades. This prolonged cleaning process allowed the effects on human health and well-being to be extremely drawn out. This inefficient response can be attributed to the lack of experience with major disasters. In fact, at the time, the EPA never established guidelines on the safe levels of asbestos for human exposure. Libby has the distinction of being the EPA's first public health emergency resulting from an environmental disaster. Therefore, the EPA's inexperience hindered their response due to a lack of knowledge on mining management and cleanups. It is likely that this disaster served as a valuable learning experience that provided the framework for the EPA's future responses to environmental disasters. Another cause of this disaster was due to the mining industry contributing to a majority of the workforce in Libby. Once the community became aware of the dangers of vermiculite mining, the miners had little choice but to continue to work. Many men were forced to choose between providing for their families and risking their health. However, they were not aware that their families were being put in danger regardless. Therefore, one of the contributing causes of this disaster was that miners had few other job opportunities, allowing W.R. Grace and Company to remain in business after concerns were raised. Finally, a major cause of this disaster can be attributed to the characteristics of asbestos poisoning. There are no symptoms related directly to asbestos exposure. The associated symptoms are a result of the development of asbestos-related disease, which often don't appear for 15 to 30 years. Therefore, by the time symptoms set in, the disease is often in an advanced and irreversible state. This explains the intergenerational impact of asbestos exposure in the community of Libby. This also highlights the importance of preventative and early intervention measures concerning toxins with latent onset of symptoms.
Ultimately, the Libby, Montana asbestos disaster can be attributed to a lack of existing protocols and policies to ensure safe mining practices. Mining companies displayed a disregard for environmental and human health, demonstrated by their lack of urgency in response to the residents' and employees' complaints. However, the limited alternative economic opportunities allowed the mine to remain open, as despite reporting adverse health effects, mining workers remained in their occupations to financially provide for their family. Nonetheless, the Libby, Montana asbestos disaster has shown to have long-lasting effects on human health and environments in and surrounding Libby. It is estimated that this disaster has cost over $600 million in environmental cleanup, at least $350 million in paid settlements, and thousands of cases before the court. The Libby asbestos disaster demonstrates how governmental and corporational prioritization of financial pursuits over environmental and human health results in the amplification of human disasters, often to an extent that is irreparable.